to aviation expert and plane talking director, that is Linden Birns, who's joining us this evening. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So firstly, we are told a shortage of air traffic controllers and then later flight diversions due to the weather. What do you make of the delays at OR Tambo?
Hi, good evening, Mngiwe. Look, I think we need to look at the timeline, and we also need to clarify that when ATNS talks about stabilizing operations and things are back to normal, they're talking about their own work. They're not talking on behalf of the airlines and the airlines operations, and they're not talking on behalf of the airport either. Now, what happened yesterday morning was that around about 9:30, they issued a communique to all the airlines and operators at OR Tambo, saying that because there was a staffing shortage, they were having to restrict traffic. They were having to impose greater intervals between departures, so delay a lot of the departures. And we saw that first manifest by around 9:30. We started seeing the first delays. By midday, those delays had extended to around 2 hours. And by 3 in the afternoon, the average delay was about 3 hours long. Now, what happened, is that the initial delays, and I know one airline, for example, told me they had 31 delays in the first hour. This was long before the thunderstorm, but they triggered another 69 delays throughout the day across the system, because if you've got an aircraft leaving Johannesburg late, it means it arrives at the point where it's supposed to go late, and then leaves late again on its return flight, and that has a knock-on impact throughout the day. What we then saw was that by the end of the evening, a number of aircraft across the country were out of position, and so were crew. So this morning we had additional delays. Those have now been resolved mostly, but it did mean we started this morning with delays. Then in addition, we had the thunderstorm yesterday afternoon. Yes, there were a number of flights that were diverted. I know, for example, Airlink diverted 5 aircraft, 4 to Gaborone, 1 to Durban. I think I saw Qantas divert as well, and also Fly Safair. But they were not the bulk of the flights that were affected yesterday. Roughly half of all of the departures out of OR Tambo were impacted directly as a result of the air traffic controller shortage. And the other thing I just want to emphasize here is that while nobody wants to compromise safety, and we all understand that air traffic controllers have a very, very critical job to perform, and they do so within their capacity, this does create a huge inconvenience for customers and a massive headache for the airlines, because they've got to juggle those operations. They've got to get people to where they need to be. They've got to make sure that their crew don't run out of duty time, because that would also compromise safety. And we saw that yesterday, where crews are running out of duty time, and that's why we had aircraft out of position and crews out of position this morning. So it becomes a huge logistical headache for everybody.
And it also becomes one that is also costly as well, especially for the people that are looking to maybe even go and have, meetings, etc., but even for the airlines themselves.
Of course, I spoke to one chief pilot before I came on air with you this evening, and he said to me, when we knew about the thunderstorm, the pending thunderstorm, we prepared for that by loading extra fuel on the flights in case they needed to go into holding patterns for the delays. So we put 20 minutes of extra fuel on board. 20 minutes of extra fuel on a typical aircraft flown on a domestic flight here is about 1 metric ton of fuel. That's around 11,000 Rand of extra fuel.
And that's a lot. And especially,
minutes.
And it boggles the mind to ensure that why is there no one ensuring that there is sufficient staff, because ultimately the ripple effect is not good for anybody.
It's not. And frankly, it shouldn't get to that position. But we do know, and ATNS have said for some time now, that they are facing a severe critical staffing shortage. There is great competition worldwide for experienced air traffic controllers and instrument flight procedure designers and airspace designers. They've got a critical shortage of those key skills. They're trying to recruit more. The Civil Aviation Authority has thrown some obstacles in the way in terms of what it wants before it'll recognize those people's qualifications and competencies and give them licenses to work here in South Africa. So, this is not a one-off. This is not going to be the first time. It's certainly not the last time. We've seen the implementation of traffic constraints, what they call flow control, around Johannesburg several times, especially since mid-2024, when a lot of the instrument flight procedures for the country were suspended because, again, ATNS lacked the critical skill to complete the renewal of many of those procedures. And we're still seeing that as fast as they can now try and recover those renewed procedures, they're letting others lapse because they haven't been able to attend to them before they expired.
Certainly a situation that we need to watch closely. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to us this evening. That is an aviation expert and plane talking director. That's Linden Birns. They're speaking to us about the situation there in fact, at the OR Tambo International Airport. So